Hey, Guru Nation, welcome back to the clinicaltrialsguru.com. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe. If you're new, hit the like button and the subscribe button. Well, watch this first, all right, and then subscribe. You make that decision for yourself. We've got a very special guest, a long time guest. I mean, Darshan, we go way back, like almost to when I started this blog.
That sounds about right, doesn't it? It's been a long, long time, and it's good to be back. It's good to be
It's
here.
good. Yeah, looking good. You got the mic, nice background there.
Thank
So,
you.
for those who don't know, I've been getting a lot of new followers lately, so this is actually good that we're doing it. So, for those that don't know, Darshan Kulkarni, he's an attorney and a pharmacist, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's only like a couple dozen of these people in the United States as it
Yeah.
is, like to have both of those degrees. And he works in the clinical research and pharma industry. So he knows a lot about the industry, obviously. And today's video is going to be an interesting topic. We've got a very polarizing individual as our president, Donald Trump, right? So we're going to talk about what his presidency means for the clinical research industry, for the pharmaceutical industry, and we had this idea when we were talking offline yesterday, but later I went to Facebook, so I'm a member of this Facebook group called Clinical Research Memes. So free shout out for you guys. Go check it out. It's like 20,000 people involved in the research industry that just color commentate on their daily experiences, right? So go check it out, Clinical Research Memes. But this very topic was in there. And they were talking about Trump and, how he wants to make the drug development process faster, and he thinks there's too much regulation right now. So we're going to talk about this. Darshan, welcome.
Thank you.
And where can people find you, actually? You're on Twitter, right?
I'm on Twitter as FDA Lawyers. I am always with you, so you can always reach me there. You can always go to my website at Kulkarni Law Firm, Kulkarni Law Firm, and we'll put some more information in the show notes. But yeah, you can always reach out to me. We should be talking. Let's figure out how to work together and be as successful as Dan is, because Dan's super successful as well.
Getting there, working, getting better every day, right? Trying to, at least.
By the way, I do want to say one thing, Dan. I think
Yeah.
you joined when it was 20,000. Turns out that the group you just had me join as well is now 29,000 people.
29, you see? I thought it was 20. 29. This is ridiculous. These are mostly CRAs, which I am one also, part-time. But there's coordinators in there. There's not too many investigators there, but with 29,000 people, I'm sure some are. They're just not active. But it's a pretty cool group to be a part of. I don't interact that often, but I just read. I'm a lurker. Right. So I produce so much content during the day. Like when I go on that page, I'm one of the lurkers.
I'm curious.
Rarely I'll comment.
I'm curious. Do you ever see your own stuff on there?
No, that's actually why I go on there. So looks like they're talking about the same things that I'm already making videos about. So sometimes I'll go in there and say, hey, I actually talked about this, and send them a link, and I'll get a new follower. But yeah, no. But we're talking about the same stuff, just separate conversations. So it's cool.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what kind of stuff were they talking about there on President Trump and his take? What did you notice?
Well, the conversation got heated within 3 comments, so that should tell you something. And the person actually prefaced it with, I'm not trying to make this political, I just want to be more informed. And that didn't help, because 3 comments later, someone's like, hey, you would be insensitive about this, blah, blah, blah. Like, just go check it out. Everyone could go in there and see. But they were talking about Trump and how he had a statement, I believe, yesterday. So hello for those watching in the future. Yesterday was January 31st, 2017. There's going to be people watching this in 2027 that, this is going to be long forgotten, right?
Who knows?
Maybe not. One thing that Trump will do is one thing we do know is things will not be the same with this guy. It's either gonna get a lot better or a lot worse. It's not
That's
gonna
right.
be the same, right?
We know that. It will not be the same. And depending on your perspective, things will get a lot better or a lot worse. And I'd hope it's a lot better for everyone.
Yeah.
The idea is that you don't want your own president to fail. I didn't want that for Obama. I don't want that for Trump. And I don't know. I just want everyone to succeed. Why is that a bad thing? So
Right.
we'll go.
Yeah, it's very good. So yeah, so they were talking about, they're getting rid of more regulations, and now
Yeah.
people start speculating about, well, what does that actually mean? Does this guy even understand what he's talking about? I believe he appointed a new FDA head recently, or
Trying to. He hasn't yet.
trying to. Okay, so he doesn't like the current one.
Well, so the way this works, and it really comes down to how our system works, the FDA is technically part of the executive branch. So the guy who works for the FDA is appointed by the president. So when the president's changed, they're allowed to change whoever they appointed. And you see that all the time. So the big thing that happened recently was Sally Yates, who was the temporary head of the Department of Justice. She was fired. But usually there's a transition team, right? It's not like he has a bunch of people ready to go from day one, because they have to go through confirmation hearings and all that good stuff. So typically the way that works is you'll have someone who's continuing from the previous administration into the next administration. With Sally Yates, what happened there was she said that I will not adhere to the whole not allowing immigrants in, or if Trump puts it, not allowing illegal immigrants or refugees in, depending on how you view that issue. But in those situations, she said, I'm not gonna ask the DOJ to do that. And he said, well, that's nice that you don't want to do that, but I consider that a betrayal. I'm going to fire you. So he did. So that's not particularly unusual to fire people who are heads in different executive agencies. FDA is being one of them, DOJ, and you're going to see that across the board. EPA, for example, head of Texas, he's now going to become head of the EPA if he has his way, which should be interesting as well. But Trump in general is not a big fan of regulations anyways. So how this plays out is going to be interesting. What is your take? Well, so here's what the executive order really said. The executive order came out and said, for every one regulation you put in, you need to take 2 regulations out. That sounds like a really good way to do some spring cleaning. The problem is, can you run a government the way you do spring cleaning in a house? and I don't know the answer to that question, not because it's necessarily a horrible idea, because I don't know of anyone who's even considered doing that.
Right.
So the idea behind it is a really folksy kind of idea of, if you're going to put one in, you need to take 2 out, decide which ones need to go. The problem with it is it's such a random thing to do. I've been contacted by a bunch of different magazines and journal articles and newspapers, etc., to talk about this topic. The first question they ask me is, who does this even help? And that's the question we're trying to start answering.
Right.
Specifically, well, are pharmaceutical companies even asking for less regulation?
Are they?
And that's interesting question. So I think it depends on where you are in the pharmaceutical company spectrum. If you're a small organization who doesn't have significant legal resources, trying to keep track of just the stuff you need to keep track of is difficult enough. Therefore, for those companies saying less regulations, that sounds like a great idea. If you're a startup who doesn't even know what they need to know.
Right.
But now let's say you're a large company like Pfizer who's got a bullseye painted on your back. You're paying $2.1 billion in fines for not following different requirements. To say that we're going to, instead of telling you what to do, we're going to keep you in limbo. We're not going to give you enough information. Well, that becomes problematic because you want to know, you want details on what the government finds acceptable. That way you can make changes as necessary. Then you start taking more of the medical device market. The medical device market, not the complex medical devices, not your Medtronics of the world, because they often have many, many resources already dedicated to things like compliance and FDA regulatory stuff. But I'm talking about devices that were initially being thought of as, for lack of a better term, toys. And I'm picking on a term. I'm going to pick on a company, and I'm going to assume that they actually are going to be doing FDA stuff, and I don't know if they have FDA resources or anything associated with this. But let's take a company like Fitbit. Fitbit, when we start out, just tracks the number of steps you take.
Mm-hmm.
If it becomes a medical device, the FDA suddenly has a whole bunch of control over what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot do, what kind of proof they need to have. From their perspective, that's completely overregulation. On the other hand, if you're a physician and you're making decisions based on the number of steps someone takes, like, is this guy walking, I'm making this up, but 10.2 miles, that's what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And people start making judgments. How do we even know that the Fitbit actually has 10.2 miles when it says it does? Has it ever been validated? So it all becomes I find that a lot of my medical device, the smaller medical device clients, work in iterative processes. They'll make one thing, they'll see what happens, what works, what doesn't work, make it better. Then there's a version 2, then there's a version 3. And those are quick and fast. Mm-hmm. And from their perspective, if you come in and say, you can't come out until version 10, they would say that's overregulation. You can't if you aren't letting me bring my product out as quickly as I probably should. On the other hand, pharmaceutical companies would come out and say, I'm talking big pharma. Big pharma would come out and say, we're dealing with patient lives here. We need to get it right the first time. You need to invest those resources so that we get it right the first time. And therefore, if you can do that, come on in. And some might argue that the dietary supplement industry has been able to get by with too little regulation.
Right.
And is that or is that not okay?
Mm-hmm.
You might argue that 23andMe, on the other hand, should they have done what they did? I believe Elizabeth Holmes would be very happy with a lot less regulation.
With Theranos, right?
With Theranos, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on your perspective on things. She would be worth, I think it was $4 billion, if I remember correctly.
Right. Something like that.
Today, yeah. And yet she's worth 0 today because I would imagine from her perspective, there's overregulation. So it's a massive difference in how you view things and what you expect your goal to be. So it's not as cut and dry as that, but but painting pharma as wanting less regulation is not fair because I don't think that's true. I think there are tons of instances. For example, pharmaceutical companies have been trying to market their product using social media, and they've literally been asking since about 2001, what do you consider social media? How do we advertise this stuff? And the FDA has not been forthcoming. Therefore, the FDA simply has been accused of stifling free speech because no one's getting into social media because they don't know what they can and cannot say. Especially when they do it wrong, they have to pay billions of dollars in fines.
Right.
So the big question, and so to that they ask for more information through guidances, through regulations. Same thing via off-label speech. There's a whole thing going on right now, and there have been consistent requests from pharma saying you need to give us more information and you need to lay out what your perspective is on off-label speech. So the FDA is working through that. For biosimilars, you've got a situation where they're saying we need to know what we can and cannot do to get a biosimilar into the market. So more regulation in many of these cases would be good things, especially when it comes to things like interchangeability. So when you have a biosimilar, they want to know if I write for Humira and I want to do a biosimilar, what do I need to do so that if Dr. Jones writes for Humira, to automatically switch it to the generic, which you can do with small molecules, which you can do with, I don't know, Prilosec. Well, Prilosec's a bad example because it's OTC. Mm-hmm. But if you take a prescription drug and you write Bactrim, the pharmacist is allowed legally to switch it to sulfamethoxazole trimethoprim. And that's part of all state laws. But that's not quite true with biosimilars. And the FDA, when they were developing biosimilars, they went out and said, we're going to have 2 different requirements. One, you come out and you basically say, I am also a biologic that does something similar, and you bring that out and you market it as a whole new product. Or you can aim for interchangeability, essentially piggybacking on the popularity of the branded
Right.
product. So
Yeah, I remember when Obama instituted Obamacare. What is it? The Affordable Health Act, right?
Affordable Care Act. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what our hypothesis turned out to be correct was a lot more bioequivalency studies, right? At least for like a 2-year period, there were a lot of BE studies, and
Okay.
clinical research sites don't care. I mean, they pay
Money's money.
slightly less,
Yeah.
but it's still good work. Um, However, now we have another change, and
Yeah.
so research site. Let's talk to the research sites first. Like,
Sure.
do you think what Trump is proposing, even though we know very little about the details of how he's going to implement this, but just looking at the macro concept of
Mhm.
less regulation, because and then take that everything that I'm saying here and
Mhm.
preface it with people like Craig Lipset from Pfizer, who I've interviewed on the show like 3 times, and
Yeah.
how they would want to do more virtual trials where they don't have to necessarily use research sites.
Yeah.
They can sort of run the trials themselves. Like, is that gonna pave the way for more of those kind of things? Like, are the research sites gonna get cut out of the picture? Are CROs gonna get cut out of the picture? CRAs in that clinical research meme, some of them are worried they might lose their jobs. I think in 30 years, we're all gonna be replaced by robots anyways. But, what happens now? What happens in the next 4 years? And what is your thoughts?
Well, and by the way, Dan, we forgot to say this when we started, which we always do. None of this is legal advice, just to be clear. It's
Or
just
career advice, yeah.
or career advice or clinical advice.
Don't quit
Um,
your job. You will not be replaced by robot yet,
yeah,
right?
we can
Yes.
discuss that on a future discussion date, but
Yes.
that's all. Because I think we're both into futurism, so we can talk about that as well in the context of clinical research. Specifically, you, Dan, may be interested in something called Janus and the Sentinel program. So let's talk about that at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember we talked about that years ago, like, 3 years ago.
Maybe. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that in a little bit.
Okay,
But
okay.
right now, your big question was, well, what happens right now? We don't have enough details, but nevertheless, um, if Trump has his way around, let's say virtual studies, if it says less regulation, I think pharma would not do as much in terms of doing more virtual trials. Not because they don't want to, but because they won't know how. They won't know what is required by the government to do more virtual studies. If you get more regulations, you'll know specifically what the FDA is looking for,
Right.
and they'll have an understanding of, okay, we want these types of studies to happen. And if you do a virtual study, here are the bits and pieces we require in there for us as the FDA to consider that acceptable.
Mhm.
Until that happens, that's probably not the direction things will go. I think the big problem that you're going to have is with less regulation, you will have paralysis by analysis, and that's the term I've coined about it. But essentially, what it comes down to is everyone will start looking at rules, going, these specific words are all the FDA is willing to talk about right now about this issue. It could mean these 9 different things.
Mm.
And because it could mean any of these 9 different things, I could try to do any of these 9 things, and that could be a reasonable reading of things, or not do any of them and be safe. When you've got patient lives and billions of dollars at stake, it's easier to just stick with what you know works than to try something new. So
I see.
that's one thing to consider.
Mhm.
Um, I
One thing
think
I'm concerned about, so I read, like, maybe 2 paragraphs on this topic, again, from that clinical research memes, a very credible news source, but they actually had a link to some blog post, and I read it. Um, so Trump is complaining about how much it costs to get a drug through regulation, right? And as someone who works in the industry that benefits from that cost, I mean, no one's going to argue that clinical trials are inefficient
sure.
and clinical trials are way costlier than they need to be. But at the same time, all of us, CRAs, CROs, investigators, people like
Clients.
yourself, we all
Absolutely.
benefit from that, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
so if they're going to get cheaper, that means that we'll have to make up for it in volume, hopefully, if they do more trials, which you're saying they may not, or we're all
Well,
just going to get cut out of our income.
not quite. Let me rephrase that. I think what you'll see is less experimentation with the types of trials you do. Then on the
Oh,
other
oh,
Then, on the other hand, there are going to be the companies that say, well, there were these other discussions that were happening, and you and I discussed this yesterday, and I was talking to some of the people who are being considered. Well, I wasn't talking to them, but I was talking to reporters who were listening to the people who are being considered to be the next FDA head. And they're talking about things like, we might require less proof. We might require drugs that simply use biomarkers as the
and
indicator of
who is
whether
this
drugs.
person? Who is this
I'm gonna have
person?
to look it up. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, okay.
Um, but yeah, so in that specific situation, what might make sense is you might get companies that say, I need to bring a product onto the market. And since I need to bring a product onto the market, I now potentially need less proof to do
Mm,
that. Therefore, let's do more studies because I need less evidence.
yeah.
So if I can get a little bit of evidence, that's often enough to convince the FDA. So
Hmm.
let's start getting that little evidence. So you may get more volume of studies, but less experimentation with the type of studies.
Right. I do think the CRAs have a valid concern
How
to
so?
be a little worried. So if trials get a little less complex,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because of less regulate, because right now the whole innovation recently has been risk-based monitoring. Like
Sure.
this is going on, it's becoming real. Like it used to
Yeah.
be a theory, now like I'm actually seeing it regularly. So
Right.
there's less monitoring visits to the site, which is good
Mm-hmm.
for the site, but
Yep.
the consequences of that is you're still taking up the site's time through phone calls, through having them scan documents, things that
Mm-hmm.
they weren't doing before because the CRA would do it when they came on site, right? Now, from the CRA's perspective, and I know this part of it too, because I'm a CRA as well, so I can see both sides of it. Uh, your contracts are being changed. So if you're an independent contractor and you go on a project by project basis and they switch one of your projects to risk-based monitoring, well, guess what? You make your money as a CRA when you go to site visits. At
Right.
least if you're an independent contractor for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an employee, it doesn't matter because you're on salary. So it doesn't matter what you do, whether you
Right.
fly, whether you go to a site, whether you stay home, you get paid the same. But
Right.
for a lot of the contractors out there, a good like probably 30% maybe or more are contractors. Your contracts are going to get affected, right? Because you're going to get paid less because you make your money when you go on site. And if they're reducing the amount of your site visits, you're either going to have to take on more contracts and hope that they're there,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe this is the industry's way of eventually squeezing out the need for so many CRAs uh, by using big data. And then this, of course, segues into, will CRAs ever be replaced by algorithms? And I argue that it's already kind of happening. Now it's going to be a long, long process. But I think every industry is going to be affected. So, of course, the CRA industry is going to, I mean, that's where CROs and sponsors spend most of their money is paying. CRAs make good money, man. Really good
Yeah,
money.
they do. So
Yeah.
overall, as a concept, I think you have some valid thoughts in there. I think the pieces I might disagree with you on is, or I'm technically this is more of a quibble than a disagreement, but I think what you're saying is that there'd be fewer CRAs. What I think would happen is that the role of the CRA would likely change. So the
Mm,
CRA who goes to each site, there may be fewer of them. As I understand it, talking to a couple of my friends who are CRAs, um, most places right now are doing a sort of double dipping. You're in that transition phase where they're still doing the same number of site visits, but also doing centralized monitoring. So it's
yeah.
a double charge. but
Mhm.
eventually they'll start going more towards centralized monitoring. When you start doing more things towards centralized monitoring, what you're going to start thinking about is, I need more statisticians. I need more people who can read these and look for specific trends. And
Yeah.
CRAs may start changing roles to do that on a more virtual level. So they may find you maybe get assigned a territory and told, instead of going to 5 places 15 times, there are 15 places, and you need to decide from a risk-based perspective, and here's an algorithm where you
Yeah.
need to go to next,
Yeah.
and then justify that to your to the centralized monitoring organization. So whether it's going to be a CRO itself or whether it's going to be the sponsor itself, depending on
Yeah.
what type of model they're using.
Yeah, they'll give you the monitoring plan as a CRA, so
Right.
you they don't even need to make decisions. They're just told what to do.
Right
But
now,
yeah, right now, yeah. Okay, so you're saying in the future they probably are gonna be given more leeway into making their own decisions on these kind of things.
there will have to be. I think that there'll
Mm,
be some level of centralized decision making and some level of sub-centralized decision making.
I see what you're
Um,
saying.
yeah, instead of it happening at the CRA decision making level where they just go, you need to go to this site 6 times, this site 7 times, and this site 8 times.
Mhm,
They're going to be told, here are 10 sites. Use our system to evaluate where you need to go to next, because our
mhm.
system will tell you where you need to go to next depending on what you found the first couple of times you went to these different places. And the FDA already uses a system like that because they decide from a risk-based perspective where they should be going. They don't go to every site as many times. They
No,
go to sites depending on the risk perspective of that
right,
risk profile of that
every
site.
site has a risk profile, yes.
Exactly.
Correct. Now do you think that we'll still need less CRAs because, yeah, their role's evolving, but you can actually scale more from one. You can get more output from one CRA rather than hiring 3.
Sure, but then the CRA is going to have to start knowing about statistics and the like. So those people may end up being at the centralized level.
Mm,
So they may need to move from
mm,
a independent, I go anywhere I need to go perspective to centralized hubs where they'll start saying, you know what, we trended this data and there's massive amounts of data coming in, and we put it into the computer and here's what we found. So you site one, you CRA in section one need to go to a couple of these sites and evaluate them further. So there'll be a lot of those types of discussions that happen as well. So I think there might be a mild drop. Eventually, there might be a massive drop, but at least initially,
That's what I'm worried about.
but I don't think that. I think if we look with a time horizon of 5 to 10 years, I don't see that much changing.
Right.
We
This is a
time
slow
horizon of
industry.
yeah,
Yeah,
but if you
yeah.
look at a time horizon of 20 years, I think all of us are going to have problems with jobs. But that's just between you and me.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
like
I know when I got started in this industry in 2004, the primary form of communication to sites was mail, right?
right,
Like it took them, and this is 2004. We're not talking about 1994. It took them like until 2006, 2007, 2008 for them to adopt email
right,
as the primary way of communicating. And this is like '08, like the iPhone already came out. So this industry is slow,
right,
but when the economics are the financial stakes are so high in this
right.
situation that they may move quicker. I mean, we're not talking about an admin task like email or sending a snail mail. We're talking about, do we need to hire 150 CRAs this year, or can we just hire 20?
I think 150 might become 100, then become
Uh,
75. I don't see them sort of switching from it. So let's rephrase that. They might go from 150 CRAs to 50 CRAs, 30 data managers, 20 technologists, blah blah blah, and then say we hired 100 people. They weren't all CRAs, but they're all in
mhm.
the clinical research field.
Right. But data managers don't make what CRAs make.
Quite
I mean, right
possibly.
now the
Absolutely.
CRAs have it. They work a lot. I've got a lot of
Right.
respect for CRAs.
Absolutely.
Um, I'm taking on a very part-time CRA gig. I've got massive respect for CRAs. The ones who travel like every day and have to write a report every. I don't know how you do it. Uh, but So they deserve their salary. I mean, they're basically foregoing like a good chunk
Oh
of
my,
their life to do
right,
this,
right.
right? But a data manager sits in the office, goes home at 5, you know, they don't get paid what CRAs get paid. So, I mean, the concern is valid. These are things I think about often, right? And I'm
Yeah.
just glad I have someone to talk to about it today. I feel like you're my therapist.
There we go. Keep telling me. Would you need a better couch?
Yeah, yeah. So please.
Just don't
So yeah,
discuss sports with me. But yeah.
yeah, no sports. You're in Philly. The Sixers are actually pretty good, but you don't know anything
I
about
know
that, right?
nothing about sports. I'm
Yeah,
just
all
not
right.
even going to
That's
pretend
cool.
anymore.
Super Bowl. Super Bowl. That's coming
Super
Sunday.
Bowl good. That's all I know.
Football? Football.
No, I don't follow. You
Ah,
know what?
I got my hair cut the other day, and the barber, it was a female, and she was
Right.
asking me, what do you have plans for this week? Okay, well, I'm watching the Super Bowl Sunday, and she said, Super Bowl. She said that's football, right? And I was
Oh,
like, "Are you kidding me? Like, are you living under a rock?" So, but you're not that bad.
I'm not that bad, but I'm pretty close.
You're close.
My I only follow the sports I do. I was a national level fighter, so I used to. That's the stuff I know and do. So that's what I'm
Really?
familiar. Yeah, I was. I had a national bronze in India and American Athletic
Wow.
Union national silver in the U.S.
What kind of fighting?
Judo.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Little known fact about Darshan. We got to do a blog about that later.
Okay.
So you watch UFC and all that stuff?
Yeah, I love. I really like UFC. I don't watch it as much as I probably should, but um, your Ronda Rousey was like around the same time, and it's kind of cool to watch someone who does judo do well, because the whole knock against judo has been, well, they don't really know how to fight. It's more of a wrestling type sport. You don't really hurt each other in the same way, and then you see Ronda come in and dominate as long as she did.
Right.
So, do you know who Ronda Rousey is?
Of course, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I watch. I'm not a fan. I like Holly Holmes.
okay.
Yeah, I
Well, she
think
destroyed Ronda, so
that's
you
right.
could pick.
That's why I liked Holly Holmes after that, not before. But I was going for Holly. I always go for the underdog because you get more out of it when they actually win, right? Like,
Yeah, but they rarely win. That's the problem.
right,
That's what
right.
the
But
underdog.
it's a bigger victory. Like if the person who's supposed to win wins, you're like, they won, whatever. But
You're
the
already a
underdog,
gambler. I can tell. You
yes.
definitely are a gambler.
So this has got to be the only place on the internet where we can talk Trump, risk-based monitoring, Ronda Rousey, like all in the same show. This is awesome, man. We need
Absolutely.
to do more of these podcasts with you. So those are my concerns, man. I think that honestly nobody knows, but I like to get people like you on because you're clearly well versed in this space, and so you can kind of see further out than maybe the average person in this industry. It won't mean that you're always right, but you you definitely have
An opinion.
educated opinions on this. So
Right.
what do you think about what I just said about the less CRAs? I mean, you don't see that happening?
I think that again, we look at time horizons, and I have this same type of discussion with my friends who are pharmacists as well, and they're all like pharmacy school students, and they're talking about, well, what kind of job should I get, and should I become you'll get pharmacists saying, should I become a clinical pharmacist? You're asking me, should I become a CRA? And it
Hmm.
all comes down to what kind of time horizon you're looking at. If either pharmacy students or CRAs are saying, I want to retire as a CRA or as a pharmacist, yeah, that's not a good idea. That's probably not going to happen.
Hmm. Hmm.
Technology's doing this way too fast and way too well
Yeah.
for us to have these jobs in 20 years.
I do want to add, though, on that same note, so this is not all doom and gloom. There's opportunities here for
Oh,
people.
absolutely.
So I talk about this with my realtor friends. You talk about it with your pharmacists, right? It's going on in every industry,
Yeah,
CRAs,
exactly.
right? Technology's replacing, I think it's cutting out the average and below average
Right.
workforce, right? The cream always rises to the top. Like, yes, Zillow or whatever the next Zillow will be, Schmillow for real
Right.
estate. It's replacing realtors. But guess what? The few realtors that actually are really good and do their job are going to earn even more than they are now.
Right.
Same thing with the CRAs. Like the cream's going to rise to the top. Same thing with pharmacists. So there is opportunity here. It's not all doom and gloom,
Let's
but you better be on top of your game. Like you need to start now becoming
right.
that irreplaceable person where a robot will not be able to replace you.
If you go in tomorrow and you can convince someone that not only do you have good management skills, not only are you really well versed with what happens on the ground when you are a CRA, but you can actually say, I understand technology. I understand how to design and read EMRs. I
Yeah,
understand how to take this data and analyze that. It's very difficult for any type of robot to replace you because there are
never.
just too many things. There are human elements that cannot be replaced.
That's right.
And those are the pieces you want to really do well with.
I always tell them like hustle's underrated. Emotional intelligence, EQ over IQ. So great,
Mm-hmm.
you're a monitor, you can go on site and do source data verification. Great, but the site thinks you're an asshole and they're
Right.
complaining to your manager. Guess what? As soon as
Right.
that robot comes around, your ass is gone, right?
Actually, even
But
before that,
even
people
before
would
that,
rather. Right. I always think about this. In the end, I expect anyone who I hire for the job to be able to do the job. However, the person I hire is the one I can tolerate 8 hours a day with.
mm,
So if you, I don't, incompetence is never going to work. So don't sort of say, I can do my job. Well, yeah, I expect you to do your job. I hired you for that.
right, right,
But if you can't tell me how you're going to do my job either better, because you're just exceptionally brilliant, or faster, smarter, or simply work better with people and bring them together to finish a task that needs to get done. If you know how to
yeah,
rally those troops, that's what makes you different. That's what brings people to the table and say, if I could choose between anyone to work with, that's the person I want.
right,
So
right.
competence is not what's going to define you.
Totally
Excellence
agree.
is something well.
Totally agree. That competence, knowledge, that's being commoditized. Do you know
Right.
the value of knowing who the presidents were or knowing, like
Right.
memorizing the table of elements has now become zero?
Right.
Because I can just pull this up and be like, oh, this was the
Right.
33rd president,
Right. Exactly.
That stuff is commodity, like that's gone. What's
Right.
left is your ability to problem solve, interact well with others, to be liked and have a good working relationship with your sites in the
Right.
context of being a CRA. I mean, there's a lot of CRAs out there. We've had experiences with them where they just come in, not the majority, but some that they come in, they kind of have it out for the site
Right.
and they'll do anything in their power to make sure that that site looks bad. And of course, the site complains, but the CRA's manager doesn't really care because they're doing a good job, and the FDA is going to look at it and they'll actually like the documentation. But that's changing, right? Those people are going to eventually be weeded out, but the cream rises to the top. Personal development, career development, just getting better and being like the master of your craft
Right.
uh, is
I think
going to be so much more important now.
I think to your point, I think the CRA who goes in to say, I know everything and you know nothing, and let me demonstrate how you know nothing, and
Yeah,
then writes out all these findings,
about
that's going
10%
to
of
be,
them, by the way.
yeah, and that's going to be a problem, and that's going to be a thing of the past eventually. What you really want, at least initially, when you're starting off sites, you want that collaboration. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to say, I don't know what you want from me. Tell me what you want so that we can do this right. To quote the Spice Girls, tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
Wow. I'm going to splice that part out and put that on Instagram. That is awesome, Darshan.
But
You're
the
right,
point is,
though.
what you really need is a situation where the sponsor, the site, the CRO, the SMO, if that's present, are all working together. This is not site versus. This is not sponsor versus. It's not
Mm,
even the FDA versus. You're all trying to see if the compound you're working on is the best for patients. It's always in the interest of patients.
mhm.
And if we can make this work in a way that it's safe for patients, then we're in a good place. If you are telling sites and if you're a CRA going in and telling sites you're doing a bad job and not telling them how to do a good job, If
Mm.
you're not educating them, if you're not empowering them, that's going to be something where a site may say, you know what? If you're a site like Harvard, or if you're a site like Penn, or whatever it is, Stanford, you can say, I have lots of money coming in. I'll choose not to work with certain sponsors because they're using certain companies. I don't see that very often, but I do see it every so often, where you'll say, I simply want to work with people who want to work with me, who do a good job working with me, because we do good work.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, you'll also have sites that are smaller and say, I like working with these specific types of organizations because they help me. They help me learn. They help me grow better. They tell me what they expect. And because of that, I will have a more successful site. The sponsor will have a more successful trial. And the CRO looks good for having done all of that. In the
Mhm.
end, the CRO and the CRA are facilitators. They have to make sure that things work smoothly, not just for the sponsor, but for the site as well. Now, the site's not doing a good job. It's on the CRA and the CRO to call them out on it. But in the same way, if the site is doing a good job and is making mistakes, it's on the CRO and the CRA to help them not
That's
make those
right.
mistakes.
And I think you summarized it well when we all of us have to remember it's about the patients, right?
Right.
Because you know why? Hey, we're patients too.
Right.
Like, yeah, we work in this industry, but we're also patients as well. Like when I have a stomach ache, I like to know that the medication I'm taking is not going to kill me
Right.
or, cause some crazy side effects. Like I want to know that. So it's hard to remove ourselves and think of ourselves as patients as well, because we all are. I mean, everyone's going to take medication at some point. Hopefully not a lot, but some people do. And for them, it should be even more important. So to end this there, Sean, bring it back full circle, unless you want to add anything else.
No.
Uh, Trump, good or bad for clinical trials? Is it going to be huge?
It's undoubtedly going to be huge. The question
Ah,
is in what direction. Um, let's see. I would argue that Trump's probably going to be good for clinical research because
mm,
there are going to be more companies coming in to do clinical research. Is that good for patients? Is the question I don't know the answer to yet. So we'll
mm-hmm,
find out. Stay
mm-hmm.
tuned. Maybe we'll have a follow up to this in maybe a couple of years. See where we are.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
maybe not.
maybe not.
maybe we'll get blown up by then.
There you go.
Only time will tell. But yeah, I agree, and I don't really have an opinion. I know that's like a cop out. I
Yeah,
the
especially
way
since you
I
made me answer that.
Yeah, I made you. I like to know. So I have a open mind, and
Yeah.
I'm known to change my mind often.
Hmm.
And some people, may look at that as a sign of weakness. I actually don't. Like I'm not invested in my uh, in any decision that I've made about like any theory. So
Right.
I can switch quickly. I'm a counter puncher. Like I'll react to the market. So like with Obamacare, more bioequivalency studies, great, we'll do that. Risk-based monitoring, great. Let's start a CRA academy. This with Trump, I mean, less CRAs, great. Well, how can we help these CRAs rise to the top rather than be pushed out? So there's
Right.
always opportunity. The point is, there's always opportunities. Nothing's gonna stay the same, anyways. Whether Trump won, or Bernie Sanders won, or Hillary Clinton won, or Donald Duck
Right.
won, it doesn't matter who.
Right.
Right? Like things are not going to stay the same anyways. You might as well react to what the market gives you and face reality. Just face reality. That's it.
I agree.
Thanks there, Sean. Anything
Thank
else?
you. I'm good for now.
We'll do another one soon. We got to do more of these. These are good. I like these longer form interviews, and we'll see what people think out there, right?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Guru Nation, and thank you, Darshan, for watching. This is Dan and Darshan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Darshan's FDA Lawyers on Twitter. FDA Lawyers. If you want to email me, Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com, and I will introduce you. All right. Thanks again, Darshan, and everyone else. Take care.
Thanks, guys.